George, I want to ask a pair of questions about decoupling. The first is just really focusing on the empirical evidence and just pointing out that, this discussion of a Cold War 2.0, it essentially draws inspiration from the first Cold War, which was a very different situation. I mean, the Soviet Union did not have an integrated economy with the West, where China today exists in a very complex state of trade, investment, and other economic interdependence with the West. So just from a perspective of sort of the empirics of what has happened, what is the evidence that decoupling is or is not occurring?
Yeah, it is. It's a moving feast. That's for sure. And sometimes the areas where we're naturally driven to look for evidence of decoupling yield very, very little. So, for example, if you look at trade, which was actually, I blame sort of Donald Trump for this actually, because he led everybody to believe that actually trade was something that governments can determine in terms of their relations with other states. That's actually not true, because you can tweak the direction of trade of exports and imports in certain ways. But actually, whether you run deficits or surpluses, or whether you have a big manufacturing surplus or a big manufacturing deficit, is essentially something that's the product of what happens in the domestic economy between savings and investment. I don't want to get too far into the economic long grass here, but trade is a complex phenomenon, and it's not quite as simple as that which was painted by the Trump administration, or indeed by others today. And certainly you don't find it in trade yet very much, although you do find it in particular types of trade, where, for example, if you were looking at advanced technology or semiconductors, for example, it's quite clear that something's going on which wasn't going on before. But if you look beyond trade, you can see that in, for example, foreign direct investment flows into the United States and out, into China and out, into Europe and out, and so on, there clearly is something going on which is what you can only call decoupling, right? Because we have become, or many countries have become, much more vigilant about the type of investment that they will accept from People's Republic of China. National security pervades almost everything nowadays. It's not just about military issues or intelligence issues, but it's about security when it's applied to farm products, to energy, to manufacturing, to technology, particularly to advanced forms of technology like communications and satellites and semiconductors, to all manner of kind of economic and commercial matters. So if you look at venture capital flows and private equity flows and foreign direct investment flows, these are down on where they have been. If you look at certain types of activities that companies embark on in China, for example, in information technology, in developing data storage and usage systems, cloud services, export of data. If you look at the activities of small and medium-sized enterprises rather than big multinational companies, there are lots of different areas in which we can see economic ties basically fracturing or becoming frayed. And I think I just think, my personal view, I think this is just a sign of the way things are going to develop in the future, because I don't really anticipate, which comes to your area, Pete, really, I don't really anticipate any great easing of tensions between China and the United States, or China and other liberal-leaning democracies, anytime in the foreseeable future. And so companies will find themselves increasingly in the crosshairs of whose laws they're going to follow and whose laws they're going to flout. And I think companies don't really like to face up to this or to challenge it, because that's not what they're in business to do. But at the margin, final point really, if you look at the survey evidence produced by the American Chamber of Commerce and the EU Chamber of Commerce in China, and look at it as a sort of a timeline to see how has this changed over the last kind of 5 years, you now see a kind of quite a steep increase to about a quarter of companies represented who either have been looking at or are looking at diversifying their investment in the future to countries outside China. Sometimes this is Japan, sometimes it's Korea, sometimes Malaysia. Obviously, the low-value stuff has been going to Cambodia, Bangladesh, Vietnam for quite some time already. Whether we're seeing a lot of what they call reshoring or friendshoring or stuff like that is not clear at this stage, certainly not a lot. But from an environmental point of view, you might think that in future, why would you want to ship goods all, halfway around the world, all the way around the world, when you could basically manufacture in Mexico for the United States or in Turkey for Europe? So I just think, again, that these decoupling or disengagement, if you want to look at it from a Chinese point of view, both sides have kind of interests to de-Sinify or de-Americanize their supply chains. And companies, I think, are kind of responding to this because they need, they typically look for resilience and stability in their supply chains. And obviously, politics makes that really, really difficult to continue at the same level.